Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of high-performance computing. Today, my guest is from Univa. We have the CTO of the company, Fritz Ferstel. So, Fritz, welcome to the show today.
Hey, Rich, nice to be here again.
Well, thanks for coming on, Fritz. We're here today to talk about license management. And I know in the past this has been kind of a deal breaker for some folks that are looking to move to the cloud or to the grid because the ISVs have been kind of resistant in the past to letting you just run their code willy-nilly wherever you want. Is that starting to change?
Well, there is ISVs who are opening up to cloud models, but nevertheless, for the best, but for the highest profile software that you can find out there, there is still license control in place, and you still will need to manage the license access, as we will be discussing during this call.
Yeah. I mean, and especially in the context of something like Grid Engine, which is a dynamic resource broker. It wouldn't do you much good to allocate all these resources and they come back and say, well, you only got a license for 3 nodes, right? So keeping that all in check must be quite a daunting task.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I mean, in an HPC forum, we usually talk about all these technical details like, CPU speeds and network speeds and storage and whatnot. But at the end of the day, one of the things that an application needs most, at least when it deals with a third-party ISV application, needs a license. Otherwise, all that speed isn't worth anything.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Fritz. I've brought up your slides. Why don't we go through that, and we'll do a Q&A at the end.
Okay. So as the title of the slide deck says, license management, it is not boring. And I hope I can show why. So let's go to slide number 2. Well, the question is it exciting? And I think the answer is really a clear yes. And why? Because there are individual application licenses, for instance, in the electronic design and automation, so in the chip design space, which can cost you more than $500,000 per seat. A single license, more than $500,000. So this becomes the single most important asset that is being managed in a cluster. I mean, it's way more important than a 50 to 100 times cheaper server that the application actually runs on. So you want to do everything that you can to keep those licenses busy 24/7, every day in the year. And you also want to make those applications perform at top speed, because only then do you get the value out of that type of application. But even if the cost for such a license is not as high, usually those licenses are a few $1,000s or something like that, there are still very specific challenges to license management. So first of all, you really want to understand what you have installed in terms of how many licenses and who uses it. I mean, usually sites have multiple clusters and have multiple installations of license managers, and they want to know exactly how many they're using where and for what purpose. And that's not easy from the get-go. So that already is something that you want to address. Then you want to pay for as few as possible, obviously, but for as many as necessary. You don't want to. You want to minimize the costs, but you really have to get your workflows done. You also want to prioritize access to those licenses. I mean, the most important project, the most important department needs to get access to those licenses when they need it. You also want to allocate licenses against funding. For instance, if a department pays more, then they should be getting more. When licenses are unused, however, you want to share them, and you may have to share them across geos, for instance. At the end of the day, then you have to do accounting and chargeback. You want to know whether the things that you wanted to be implemented all actually have been done, and whether everybody has been getting their fair share. And finally, you also want to be in a situation where you can reserve licenses if there is a critical project phase, for instance, which needs to be unimpacted by any disturbances, then you want to be able to reserve licenses. So improving such license utilization is really a direct impact on ROI, or actually it provides an instant ROI. And it can really get you dramatic savings. I mean, if you can shave or if you can optimize by 10% the usage of one of those expensive licenses, this 500,000 license, you already have 50,000 per year there, right? And if you have a couple of them, then you know what that means. So this is really why license management is really something that is challenging and at the same time exciting. So to address those challenges, on the next slide, we have information on our new product, Univa License Orchestrator. It has been released in July 2013. It must be using Univa Grid Engine 8.15 or later. So it is a additional product next to Univa Grid Engine, and Univa Grid Engine 8.15 or later supports it. It's an open architecture, so it can be integrated with any license management capability, but the first release only supports FlexiLM License Manager, which is arguably the most important and popular one. And it vastly replaces and exceeds other means of license management that previously existed with Grid Engine. There were some internal capabilities that you could use for license management, and there was an open source contribution called Kulik Server, also known as the Olesen method, named after the guy who created it, which actually did a reasonable service for a couple of years, at least for some simpler scenarios. But Univa License Orchestrator goes far beyond that. On slide number 4, I have a quick look at the architecture and don't want to spend much time here. The important thing to take from this is that, first of all, Univa License Orchestrator sits on top of any number of Grid Engine clusters, and then Grid Engine itself has been enhanced by some components which make it interact with this license orchestrator. There is an enormous amount of bookkeeping and status exchange going on in order to make this work, and that is done by these enhancements. That's why you actually need Univa Grid Engine 8.15 in order for Univa License Orchestrator to really provide its full power. And then, of course, License Orchestrator also works with the FlexLM components, which are denoted here as Flexera publishers. On the next slide, I have the first of a number of slides going over use case scenarios which we're addressing with Univa License Orchestrator. The first one is, as we have already seen in the architecture slide, that you can actually run you can run across multiple license managers. So here in this picture at the top, you see two Grid Engine systems, and each of them one has 3 and the other one has 2 Flexera publishers. And Univa License Orchestrator can actually run across them. So actually it can aggregate license information that is maintained by each of these FlexLM license managers, and it can share it out to jobs which are running in any of those 2 Grid Engine systems. So if these 2 systems, for instance, were representing 2 geos, then you can share across those geos. Slide number 6 is the first one of 2 about the fair sharing of licenses. So one of the things that you want to be able to do is, if you have a certain set of licenses, say 100, and you have, let's say, 3 projects utilizing them, then you want to be able to set automated sharing entitlements such that, for instance, the first project gets 30%, the second project 50%, and the third project 20% of those licenses over time. If licenses are unused, somebody else can use them. But if everybody wants the license, then you need to compensate for any overusage, so you can actually reach the distribution that you have defined. And this should be fully automated and implemented by the license management system. So again, also this goes across clusters and license managers. And here on the next slide is just a little picture of the graphical user interface that allows you to define those license shares. And then here a few examples. So you have 6 users here and 3 licenses with some default users. So users which are not explicitly listed fall into the default user category. So you have these users which are listed here, and then you have the licenses that are also listed here. And and then you have the split that you see down here in the graphical user interface. You see this in the column shares. And then you see percentages, for instance, percentages at the level or total percentages and so on. So this is the type of information that you get through this user interface and how you can actually set up this policy. And again, Unified License Orchestrator makes sure that you can automatically maintain those shares even across clusters and even across license managers. Slide number 8 has a similar scenario where we actually have also some type of sharing, but you don't. What you really are after here is that you always have a fixed share. Whenever you are in the system, whenever you want to run jobs, you always have a fixed share of those licenses. So there's a second policy specifically for that. It is somewhat similar to fair sharing, but it is a little bit different in that fixed sharing. Next slide, limiting license requests. So what you want to be able to do is not only define shares, but also provide a total limit, so to speak, a quota against license usage. So for instance, for a certain project, you might want to be able to say, I want to limit this project to never be able to use more than 100 licenses of that type. So there is a specific policy in License Manager for that as well. You can actually have that across projects or departments or different user groups. And for each of them, you can limit the license usage of any license that you are managing. This works like rules. So you have a set of rules, and the system just goes through them, and the first one matching is basically the one that is in effect, that is being taken into account. Goes about preferential access. So there's also a policy which basically divides the users into license owners and license borrowers. If the policy is set up appropriately, then license owners will always get access to the licenses as long as they need them. If they don't, then a license borrower can have them. But as soon as somebody who owns the license wants that license, they get access to it. It's immediately freed up and passed over to them. Along those lines, there is also a policy for so-called preemption, which is usually related to the priority of jobs. So if a job is very important, then it can be configured to take a license away from a lower priority job, and then after having finished the application, return it back to the lower priority job. So that's a functionality commonly known as preemption. And again, Unified License Orchestrator has a functionality for that as well. And another functionality or another use case scenario is for reserving licenses. So if you know that you have a critical project and you want to start it, let's say noon tomorrow, and you know you need 10 licenses for that, then you want to be sure you actually really have those 10 licenses available. You can reserve them with Unified License Orchestrator, and it guarantees you those 10 licenses will be available. but Univar License Orchestrator will still make every attempt to utilize those licenses before the time of your reservation has actually arrived. So it will use them for jobs which have a guaranteed runtime ending prior to that reservation. That is called backfilling. So that's available as well. And as a final use case, on slide number 13, there is also the ability to have grid engine and non-grid engine use in a mix. The classical thing is actually that you have grid engine managing those licenses, and somebody goes in interactively and grabs a license just by starting an application interactively. And that actually would take away a license while Grid Engine still believes it has it. And the same is true for Univar License Orchestrator. So the trick here is that we provide specific wrappers which go around interactive commands. And those wrappers then will signal to Univar License Orchestrator that a license has been used interactively and it will no longer hand it out to Grid Engine. So this is to avoid that Grid Engine's jobs start and find that there is no license available for them. On slide number 14, just to point out that we have integrated Univar License Orchestrator with the ecosystem that we provide from Univar for Univar Grid Engine. The same is this entails also the Unisite capability that we ship with Univar Grid Engine. Unisite is an accounting, reporting, and data analytics tool which goes into Univar Grid Engine, collects data, and allows you to create reports about what has been used, where, and how much, by whom, and so on. This is integrated with Univar License Orchestrator, so Unisite not only collects the CPU usage, memory usage of jobs, it also collects the license usage. It does that across clusters. It does that across Univar License Orchestrator installations. So you can get a complete picture of the license usage in your environment and whether the policies that you have set forth in Univar License Orchestrator actually have been implemented in the, let's say, last month or so. And you can create reports from that, graphical reports or alphanumeric reports, tabulated reports. So in conclusion, license management is certainly as important as any of the other management of valuable assets in a cluster. As a matter of fact, the software licenses are often the most costly components in a cluster, so they need to be managed as well as possible. And Univar License Orchestrator is a new product which, in combination with Univar Grid Engine, actually addresses those challenges and allows you to derive full value from the licenses an organization owns and optimize the license expenditures. So with that, I'm through the presentation. On the last slide here, we just see my contact details if anybody has any questions, or the link to the License Orchestrator product page.
Okay, here we go. So thanks for that, Fritz. You know, a question about the genesis of this. I'm sure you guys didn't just sit around and conjure up these ideas as something that might be a fun project to do. Was this all about customer requests?
Oh, this is probably, at least in some industry segments, it is probably the most requested functionality. I mean, again, as I said, you know, there are industries out there where licenses cost an arm and a leg. And they definitely need that capability more than anything else. And so that's why we really built it.
Yeah, you know, and Fritz, with a mature technology like Grid Engine, would you consider this license management to be a forte of Grid Engine versus other resource brokers out there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there isn't many products out there which actually have that level of license management capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it took us a couple of years to come to something that actually addresses all those challenges and, you know, provides a consistent approach. It is by no means an easy thing to do. I can assure you of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and Fritz, I'm trying to picture a scenario where someone might use this, right? So, like in Detroit, say if they had people working during the day, and they've got developers, say in India, and they wanted to optimize those resources. Is that the kind of scenario where this would come into play?
Yeah, that is very typical. I mean, even though folks run the stuff, I mean, jobs, even when they are out of the office, which is, the whole point of using a resource management system in the first place.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, the workflow pipeline dries off over the night, so licenses are no longer being used, and they can be used where there's a shortage of licenses. And as a matter of fact, really the whole goal for an organization using this is to buy as little licenses as possible and utilize such sharing opportunities for reducing their expenditure.
And I guess kind of a wrap up here, Fritz. It looks like this is really about saving money, right? And getting the most from your resources, just like you're trying to get the most from the hardware, you're trying to get the most from your licenses as well. Was that the goal at the outset, is to help them save money?
Absolutely. I mean, if you want, let's say, budgets in the IT industry aren't exactly exploding, right? In many,
Yeah, yeah,
in many cases, they have been shrinking,
yeah.
and at the same time, I mean, license usage or actually the applications that are under license control need to be used more and more because with those applications, those customers actually create their products, they create their value. So helping them to save as much as possible is really the goal here.
Well, terrific. Well, Fritz, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rich.
You bet. You
Always a
bet.
pleasure.
All right. All right, folks. That's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on high performance computing.